Hi, my name is Mark Hermiller, and I want to welcome you to the first of many Heartricity videos that will cover a variety of topics in cardiac rhythm management. As it says here, the videos are intended to allow for device clinicians like you to learn about checking pacers and ICDs at your own pace. So, today's video is an introduction into three of the basic elements of cardiac rhythm management, and those are timing, sensing, and pacing. We could include shocking as a fourth element, but since that is specific to just ICDs, we'll cover that as its own topic in a later video. In this video, we're going to touch on these three topics: timing, sensing, and pacing, and in subsequent videos, we'll go more in depth into each one of these. Now, in this video and future concept videos, when I say pacemaker, just assume that the concept I'm talking about is applicable to ICDs as well, unless noted otherwise. In future videos, we'll talk about the things specific to ICDs, such as shock therapy and other differences compared to pacemakers, but that will be down the road. So, one way to think of pacemakers from a timing standpoint is that they act like alarm clocks, very sophisticated and very precise alarm clocks. They don't make sounds like alarm clocks, but the idea is that, like an alarm clock, a pacemaker is programmed so that when a certain amount of time has elapsed, the alarm goes off and the device does something, like deliver a pace, for example. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at a basic example of timing in a pacemaker. We're going to introduce a term here, and that is lower rate limit, abbreviated as LRL. And this is the rate below which the device will not pace. In other words, the pacemaker will not allow the pacing rate to go below 60 beats per minute, which is a common initial setting for pacemakers. Now, for illustration purposes, it's helpful to express this 60 beats per minute into beats per second. So there's 60 seconds in a minute, which means for a pacer with the lower rate of 60 beats per minute, that's equal to 1 beat per second. So that's what we're going to use for this example. Okay, so now we're drawing a line to kind of reflect what an ECG would look like. So the device is going to be turned on, so that's 0 in terms of the timing. And since it's programmed to 60 beats per minute, again, that's 1 beat per second, we can see that after 1 second, the quote-unquote alarm goes off. And for a pacemaker, this means a pace is generated. And you see that vertical line, and that's what we call a pacer spike. And you'll see that on an ECG. Again, we'll get into pacing in greater detail in future videos, but we just wanted to show you in this introductory video when and why a pace is delivered from the device and what the pacemaker spike looks like. Okay, so back to the timing. Once this pacer spike is delivered, this restarts the alarm clock, if you will, for 1 second, and another second elapses, and then another pacer spike is delivered. The clock resets again, another second elapses, and the same thing happens, and so on. So let's say instead of 60 beats per minute, we set our lower rate limit to 70 beats per minute, meaning the device won't allow the rate to go below 70 beats per minute. Now, what this means is that instead of the pacing spike being delivered every 1 second, it's delivered every roughly 0.85 seconds. And if for some reason we set the pacer to 100 beats per minute, the pacer would pace every 0.6 seconds. So basically, as the lower rate limit increases, the time interval in between paces shortens. The other thing you'll get used to seeing and hearing when it comes to checking devices is that the time intervals are expressed in milliseconds. Again, these devices are very precise, down to the millisecond, which is 1/1000th of a second. Another way to say that is 1,000 milliseconds equals 1 second. And so in this example, 0.6 seconds equals 600 milliseconds. Okay, so the timing thing seems pretty simple up to this point, right? But now let's take a look at the next example. Let's assume we have a very old pacemaker. Let's go 40 years back, maybe even 50 years back. So we're going along, a pace is delivered after a second has elapsed, like previously, and then the alarm clock starts again. But then there's what we call an intrinsic beat that takes place, or an intrinsic QRS. This is when the heart tissue depolarizes, or more simply, the heart beats on its own without being paced. So a very old pacer would just wait until that 1 second elapsed and then just pace again and so on, essentially ignoring that intrinsic QRS. Well, today's pacemakers don't do this. Let's go back and take a look. So again, we see a pace after a second has elapsed, and then we have our intrinsic QRS. So today's pacemaker sees this intrinsic QRS, or as we also say, the device senses the intrinsic beat, and this causes the timer on that alarm clock to start again. So after the intrinsic beat is sensed, the clock starts, and then after 1 second has elapsed, then we see another pace. The key takeaway here is that the pacemaker is capable of seeing, or another way to say it is sensing, the intrinsic beats. As in this example, when the device sensed the intrinsic beat, it restarts the clock, and it doesn't pace. The term we use to describe the device not pacing as a result of sensing this signal is inhibit. In other words, pacing is inhibited due to the presence of this intrinsic beat. Okay, the last thing we want to point out here is, as you can see, I've written here in this interval less than 1 second. And that's just to point out that that intrinsic QRS must have been generated within 1 second after the previous pacer spike. Otherwise, we would have seen a pacer spike at 1 second or more. So again, there's this pacer spike, and then prior to the 1 second elapsing, the intrinsic beat came in. So again, the less than 1 second note here is just to reinforce that that intrinsic beat had to come in less than 1 second after that last pacer spike. Okay, so I hope this introductory video has been helpful just to kind of set the stage for getting more in depth into these topics in the future. So what I would suggest is watching the next video, which is on sensing concepts. And if you have any suggestions or questions or comments, would love to hear from you. Feel free to shoot me an email at the address indicated here on the screen. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future. Take care.